Boom. And we are live. I am joined by John Morgan from MMA Junkie on the Road Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no worries, brother. Pleasure to be here.
How is everything? Wherever you're at? I know you just traveled to Abu Dhabi. You're back. You got a nice setup over there. How's everything with you?
It's good, man. You know, life in Las Vegas, we're getting back to the routine, I guess. I won't say back to normal. Who knows when that's going to happen again? But yeah, 5 weeks in Abu Dhabi was intense. You know, it's awesome to see the whole scope of everything that's going on there with Fight Island, for us to continue to be able to have big international fights. But now, back home in Vegas, we'll get the Contender Series going again. We'll get the kind of the weekly fights like every Saturday. So it's nice, man. We've been fortunate in MMA. I mean, I guess, Dana White was just crazy enough to keep pressing forward, and we got going again. You know what I mean? So it's been a crazy year, like for everybody, of course. But it's good. We've got some routine at least.
Right. Before we dive into everything, you have an awesome setup there. Is that some bobbleheads I see? You got some posters. That's one of my favorite events, Forrest Griffin versus Rashad Evans. It's a nice setup.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's my little office. It's funny. I didn't like a lot of people, I'm sure. I didn't really have that great of an office set up before the pandemic set in, and then I realized I'm going to be stuck in my house all the time. So my wife was great and helping me out. We kind of redesigned some stuff and redecorated. But yeah, MMA bobblehead, man, they've got some awesome stuff. The guys over there are really cool. And yeah, some old posters. Back in the day, the autograph posters, the ones that everybody on the card signs, they were actually like affordable, man. You could get them for like $100, $150, and so I used to buy them. Now they're like $500 a pop or $1,000 a pop, and I got a wife and kid, man. I can't afford to buy them anymore. But I got some old ones. I got UFC 100 downstairs is a pretty cool one, obviously. So little something around the office.
Little something. All right, John. So let's talk about you for a second. So how did you get into everything that you do? Because at first, I always been a fan of MMA Junkie. Like, it would be one of the first things I do after I shower. I'm eating breakfast. I usually go to all these different websites, whether it's because I cover the Orlando Magic. It'd be, this was before I even covered the Orlando Magic. It would just be, okay, what's the basketball news? Any trade rumors? Okay, NFL. Let's go through the NFL. Okay, now let's go to MMA. And so I'd go to MMAJunkie.com. It's like, oh, I remember hearing a lot of stuff about BJ Penn at the time. Chuck Liddell news. So MMA Junkie has always played a pivotal role in MMA. So can you kind of walk us through what you do, how you got involved with that, and then just kind of what you do now? Because you're at the top of the game. You just traveled to Abu Dhabi. So how did you get into this situation?
Yeah, no, man, I appreciate all those kind words about Junkie, man. We've built it over years and years. So I went to school for journalism. I wanted to be a journalist. I grew up and realized I was not going to be a professional athlete, but still wanted to be involved in it if I could. I went to school for journalism, ended up not working in the field for a while just because there's, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's not a ton of money in it at the very beginning. And so I was actually making some more money outside in the restaurant business, but I was always an MMA fan. I grew up watching it, loving it. The first UFC I ever attended was UFC 16 way back in the day in Kenner, Louisiana. So, yeah, so really honestly been there from the start, but didn't really put the two together, you know what I mean? Because in the beginning, MMA, it wasn't the industry that it is now, you know what I mean? It was just kind of the Wild West. It was just something that was there, and I liked it, but I didn't think there was ever really going to be a job in it. But it came to a point where I was working in the restaurant business. Actually, was how I supported myself, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I had an opportunity. Actually, I used to read MMA Weekly every day, and in the forums there, Gorgeous George Garcia from MMA Junkie Radio, now it was Tag Radio then, was looking for somebody to help recap their interviews, basically to put them on MMA Junkie. At the time, I really didn't know MMA Junkie. It just kind of started. But I basically applied for that and started basically doing intern work for him. And the intern work quickly turned into a part-time job, and then the part-time turned into a full-time, and I moved to Vegas in 2008. So, yeah, man, good fortune, right place, right time. And it's been awesome, man. It's MMA has taken over my life, man. That's for sure. Like it's just nonstop. You know what I mean? There's no off season. But I love it, man. It's that silly cliche or whatever. If you love something you do, you'll never work a day in your life. It's that, you know what I mean? You may have to work 12 or 14-hour days on the road or whatever, but man, there's nothing I'd rather do. So some good fortune, some good timing, and some hard work. Hopefully, kind of all went my way.
That's incredible. And so when I interview these players in the locker room with the Orlando Magic, I still have, and I have no shame in saying this, I'm a fan. Like when I ask these questions, it's like I love it. Like I'm interviewing Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like I just spoke to Steph Curry. It's like, so no matter how big I feel that I may get or people get, the love for the game, I just feel like will always show and like shine through. And that's one thing I always wanted to applaud uh, you and what you do. So I'm a nerd when it comes to this stuff. So I'm watching the press conferences. I watch the embeddeds, and I'm like, this. You always get the first question, and I'm like, let me watch this question. So then when I watch you ask these questions, you can. I'm not bashing anyone else, but you can tell you're asking these questions. For one, they're great questions. Just you obviously your knowledge of the game, but two, you could tell that you're actually your love for the sport, your love for the game. And I feel like some media personalities or some people may not have that love. They may just kind of ask those questions for clicks, or they may ask those questions to get a rise out of someone. And when I watch you and I watch your questions, you ask those questions, like I said, not off knowledge, but also you can tell your love for the sport. And I always wanted to applaud you for that. You always do an amazing job.
No, man, I appreciate that, and I do kind of try to take it that way. I mean, I think it's okay to still be a fan at heart. I mean, obviously, you can't
Right.
act like a fan. You've got a
Right.
code of conduct to follow and a level of professionalism that you need to carry, and all those things. But that doesn't mean that in your heart you can't still have passion for the game.
Right.
And I do that. There's nothing I love better than when I meet somebody and they're like, "Man, you always ask what I want to know." You know, I mean, you what the fan. I'm like, "Cool, that's exactly it, man. That's it," because I'm still a fan too. You know, so yeah, I think that's okay. I think sometimes people it's kind of like a put down, like, oh, you're just a fanboy or whatever. And you're right, you
Mm-hmm.
can't be you can't act unprofessionally. But I
Right.
think it's still okay to say, like, yes, I cover the sport, I cover it as a professional, but I also love it. I mean, I
You
also
love
enjoy it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
nothing wrong with it. And I think that's what makes your work as great as it is. I want to transition to this. So, okay, COVID-19 happened, the pandemic happened. Obviously, no one's experienced anything like this. I had Dean Thomas on the podcast when it very first kind of started and it happened. So I'm recording this podcast with him. And I was like, you know what? The UFC, this is when like no sports were going on. Like when it first happened, everyone's like, whoa, what is this? Everything's getting shut down. No NBA season. And the UFC and Dana White, he's hyper aggressive and he's extremely smart. And they're like, the UFC is they're going for it. I was like, wow. So my initial reaction was, if anyone can do it, it's Dana White. And then secondly, I'm like, Dean, do you understand the exposure that MMA is going to get now? So now all these sports fans who can't watch their sport are just craving for any type of sport. They're all going to watch MMA now. And I was like, how big do you think this is? He's like, oh, this is huge. This is an opportunity of a lifetime, not to downplay the situation or how severe the situation is, but for MMA itself, the exposure, you can't put a price on this. For you covering the sport, obviously the pandemic we do not want the pandemic. Never wanted it to happen. But granted, it happened, and the UFC kind of obviously worked through it, and we'll get into the details with that. Have you noticed a shift or a huge change, or maybe people you didn't know watch the sport now watch it because they had an opportunity to watch it because of the pandemic?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I mean, the truth is, and obviously I've been covering the sport for a long time. I mean, you do have to understand that it is always going to be a little bit of a niche sport, right? To a degree, there's just always
Yeah.
going to be certain people that aren't okay with combat sports.
Right.
There's going to be certain people that aren't okay with women hitting each other in the face. You know what I mean? It's just the reality. There are people that are going to feel that way. But I do believe that, as you said, you can't say, oh, the pandemic was great. No, it wasn't. It was terrible. I remember, man, dude, I remember the beginning of the pandemic, like watching like virtual car racing. They were doing like virtual F1
Right.
races. I'm like, I just need something. Remember the dude, like the marble racing was getting like huge views on social media because people just needed some kind of competition. And so, yeah, the UFC, coming back before everybody else. I think it was big and exposed into a lot of different people. And let's not forget too, ESPN was happy to push that programming out because they didn't really have
Right.
anything else. So, it was kind of the perfect storm of people needing something to watch and ESPN needing something to put on their airwaves. And so it got, kind of prime placement. And, you had sports personalities, for better or worse, you had personalities that may or may not know anything about the sport talking about it, but at least they're talking about it. So yeah, I think it did. I think it did get some good exposure. And you touched on the Fight Island concept, man. That first run of Fight Island, like Fight Island took on it became a character within itself. You know what I mean? It took on a life of its own. People going like, yeah, what the hell is this dude doing? Like, what's going on with the UFC? So, yeah, I definitely think that, again, while I think we all wish life was back to normal, that UFC did was able to take some positives out of it.
Okay, so now you're there firsthand. Like you have an experience that very few people in the world are experiencing. So now the pandemic happened. The UFC is one of the first, I think actually was like the first major sport taking place. All eyes are on it. You just came from Abu Dhabi. So what has that been like as far as the regulations, the precautions? There's no audience. So now these fighters, at the same time, I know they like to get amped and juiced with the crowd and feed off the energy, but now they can hear their corner clearly. And like someone like Justin Gaethje, for example, I know he just lost to Khabib, but he's someone where his coach talks about how he's like it's a video game. It's a remote controller. He listens to everything I say. So now I feel some fighters benefit from that. So from the press conference to the build up to the actual fight, what has that whole process been like with the social distancing? Obviously, the UFC did a phenomenal job with it. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, no, it's been wild just, watching them kind of develop the bubble process and how, all the safety. I mean, their commitment to safety and to doing things properly and correctly has been amazing. And that's why, there's been a couple incidents here and there, but that's why there hasn't been anything, widespread, because they're taking it serious, man. And they follow all the proper steps, which has been cool to see, man, to see their commitment level to it. But as far as the fights, the press conferences in Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, we get to do them in person because they allow for it. Here, they don't allow for that in Vegas. So we're having to do a lot of these like virtual media days, which obviously, like we're doing now, man. Everybody's getting used to this whole process, which is good. You're still able to get content. I mean, you're still able to get interviews and that sort of thing. I missed it. I missed the in-person stuff. I feel like you pick up on so many like subtle things, some kind of nonverbal communication, some body language type stuff that you can't pick up on these kind of Zoom calls. And so I miss that aspect of covering the sport in person, on a weekly basis. But as far as the fights themselves, what I think I've come to realize is that for the lower level fights, for kind of the prelim fights, I actually don't mind a crowd not being there because, like you said, you could the things that you hear. I mean, you can hear the weight of the blows, the impact, the sound that they make. You can hear the coaches, which is kind of cool to hear, the communication that's going on. In the instance of a guy like Kevin Holland, you can hear him talking nonstop. It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear every word that comes out of his mouth. So that's just cool. Where it loses a little bit is in the big fights, man. Like the title fights, the championship fights. I mean, even the other night in Abu Dhabi, the final night with Khabib and Gaethje, they did have some VIPs in there, but it wasn't many. It was, I want to say, like maybe 40 or 50 people, maybe like fans. So I mean, there was some cheering, but not the same. I think back to like the final pay-per-view back in March of 248, I think it was. Like for instance, that one, the Adesanya fight that night with Yoel Romero wasn't that great, but remember that Jacek Zhang Wei Li fight, man, like how amazing that. And the fight was so amazing, but the crowd are like going back and forth and they line up and you're still not even sure who won, and there's a sense of anticipation, this buzz.
Yeah,
all that's missing. You know what I mean? All that's missing when you have those big championship moments. You wish that there were people roaring. People. They crawl up on the cage to celebrate, and you had those beautiful views, and we don't have that anymore. So that part sucks. But overall, I think as a whole, I think that's probably been another beneficial thing for MMA is it's not that bad without fans. You know what I mean? You still get you just see it in a different way. It's presented in a little bit different way. So, but it's been interesting to watch this whole thing. We've watched how like coaching has changed and developed. I mean, we realized really quick that dude, if you weren't using code words before, you better use code words now because every single thing that you say can be heard. Even when you go to the corner between rounds, now before coaches used to yell, now they're like, hey man, make sure that we go the right. I mean, they got to be really careful with it, So and as commentators, I've done a couple of cage free fighting championship shows, so I've had to be in that role as well, where like it's weird because you kind of forget that the fighters can hear everything you're saying. You know what I mean? Right. So it's been unique to see how things have kind of developed through this whole thing.
It's like playing chess. Okay, so before we dive into, we got Conor, we have Khabib's retirement, Anderson Silva, there's Jon Jones, Israel Adesanya, that big news. I want to run this funky theory past you. You may have heard it. I ran it past Dean, and Dean's like, he loves it. And I'm like, you better tell Dana whenever you're with Dana with these looking for a fight, just please let him know. And I know certain organizations have kind of taken this. It's not just like solely, hey, this is my idea, but I know certain organizations have ran with it. I think there needs to be a scoreboard, John, because watching basketball, watching NFL, and I refer to those a lot because I cover them. The score. I couldn't imagine watching the game and not knowing the score. And so when I see certain cases where, like, what were the judges thinking? Even if the right person won, it's like you gave that person 2 rounds, and it's like I did not see that. I feel like if there was a scoreboard where not like a point system, like, oh, he lands a kick, that's 3 points. It's more of who won that round. So the
Right.
judges submit their score on who won that round. So now the fans know, because a lot of new fans that are watching may not have that much knowledge on the sport, may not truly understand what's going on. And it's like, I don't know who won that round. Is that valuable that he got a takedown? Is that points? So now for the new viewers, because the sport is growing, for the fighters, because what if a fighter's like, oh, I won that round, and then they realize that, oh no, the judges did not score it that way. For the coaches, so everyone involved, I feel like if they knew the score on who won that round, I think overall the experience as the sport grows would be better for not only the fighters, not only the coaches, not only the media members, but as well as the consumers watching it. Now that it's on ESPN and you're getting all these people in the bars that never watched it before, they want to watch it. They want to know what's going on to the best of their abilities. What do you think about the scoreboard? Do you think that's something that would actually positively influence the sport, or do you think it would be kind of a distraction? Is it even possible?
It's interesting. You bring up a good point of fan education and then being able to understand of what's going on. I haven't been a huge proponent for open scoring, but haven't been like adamantly opposed to it either. I think it would be an evolution process in much the
Right.
same way we talked about how coaches had to change during the pandemic. I think the same thing would happen. I think in the beginning, it might prove a little bit of a mental distraction for certain fighters.
Right.
If a judge gives a wrong score, I mean, do you get distracted all of a sudden, because like, hold on, man, that wasn't right. And there's all the kind of ways and things that would interact. But, I think that could all be, changed in time. I think people would get used to it. The biggest thing for me, though, is, and so I don't necessarily hate the idea, but the thing I always try to point out to people when they talk about open scoring is realize that doesn't fix the problem. You know what I mean? Like
That's true.
the problem of judging, it's like when people say we need a half point system. I'm like, we have judges that aren't even picking the right person, and now you're telling them you want them to put half points in. Like you need
Right.
them to be
Right. Right.
even finer detail. Like that doesn't work to me. So to me, not opposed to open scoring. I could see the benefits. I do think there are some potential drawbacks, like I said, in terms of mental approach and how certain fighters handle it. Some fighters don't want to know they lost a round. You know what I mean? It's not good. Like there are certain fighters. It's always interesting how corners work with their fighters, because some fighters want you to be honest. Some fighters don't. Some fighters,
Right.
they just need kind of a pep rally. They're like, hey, you looked great right there, even though you didn't look great, but they need that positivity in their head so they don't get down on themselves. So I think it would be an evolution process. But the biggest thing I would always point out is, remember, that doesn't fix anything. The continued education process of the judges and officials, that's what matters. We got to continue educating and bettering and making these officials, more and more seasoned and educated in what they're doing, so that they're making the right decisions, whether they put them on a scoreboard or not.
I know when I watch these big boxing fights and you have like Roy Jones Jr. or back when like HBO was doing it, or like you'd have their scorecards or who the commentators think won. And I know watching that, like Deontay Wilder and Fury, when they went to the decision, everyone's like, oh, okay, no, he had Fury winning that round. I had Wilder winning that round. And it engages everyone in that discussion. And I could only imagine if the fighters knew and it's like 2-2 going to that championship fifth round, how thrilling that would be. But to your point, you're right. That would not change the problem. And so now, how do you do that? I've heard Joe Rogan talk about adding more judges, or maybe changing who is qualified to be a judge. What would you think about adding more?
I mean, adding more just means we're having more unqualified people potentially in there. You
There,
know what I mean? Although listen, as the sport gets older and more people, there's people that are probably pretty good judges from their couch because they've been watching for 20 years. You know what I mean? I was talking to my wife about this the other day. Like, I've literally watched over 10,000 fights at this point in my life. You know what I mean? Like, it's
be a
insane when
judge.
you think about it. Yeah, I mean, it's insane. There's people like that probably understand. To me, it's about education and accountability, man. And I think there needs to be a more transparent and clear education process. And I point to, I had a buddy that used to be a referee in soccer over in England, and there, man, like the judges or the referees, I should say, they're all judged on a very they're evaluated. Like, somebody comes and gives them a score, like where their positioning was, how they handled situations,
Wow.
all this stuff, and that's how you determine who's at the Premier League level and who's up and down and that sort of thing. And there's nothing like that in mixed martial arts. There's in some athletic commission officials and stuff, they'll tell you, oh, well, I talked to the judges or I talked to the referees after every fight. Like, cool, but like, where, like, are you scoring them? Are you evaluating them?
Right.
I mean, do we really know who the most reliable judge, the most reliable referee is. So, I mean, I think some kind of, tracking process like that would be beneficial. And like I said, an online, and some of the guys are doing it. It started in California where it was during the pandemic when there were no events. These guys were doing like massive Zoom calls, strictly voluntary. But some of these officials that were doing like Zoom calls and like watching around on Fight Pass and scoring it and talking about it. And like that's the stuff that needs to be happening. You know what I mean? Like let's test these guys every year. Let's make sure they're sitting in a seminar every year or whatever the case may be. I mean, it may sound silly, but I think that's it. Just constant education and constant evaluation, I think, is just how we continue to get better and better officials.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So let's get into the big fights. Obviously, you're someone that's watched thousands and thousands of fights. You've seen these people up close. You've seen their personalities. Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, the rematch. I remember the first time they fought, and now so much has happened and transpired since that fight to now. I don't have to go down the list on what Conor has done. Obviously, Dustin Poirier is a different fighter since the first time they fought. What is that going to – do you see that fight being similar to the first, or do you see that fight changing? Like, stylistically, I think they're the same. But like I said, Dustin Poirier has changed the way – not to change the way he fights, but he's just evolved so much as a fighter. His boxing is so crisp. He's a very strong for that weight class. Do you think, because we talked about the audience, we talked about like the crowd, and that's one thing Conor thrives off of. I know he wanted this fight in like Dallas Stadium. Like he thrives off that, and he has the strongest fan base in UFC history. He's not going to have that. Do you think that plays a role or impacts him in any way? Because his last fight, Donald Cerrone, there was an audience. There's an audience. How do you think that? How is that going to be weird for Conor? He has nobody to really hype him up, and he thrives off that.
I'm really intrigued by that as well because I think it's a very fair question. I mean, we'll see. Once the fight starts, most of these guys will tell you, man, once the fight's going, like that stuff all kind of fades away. At that point, you're so hyper focused on the man in front of you that's just trying to take your head off that you kind of lose some of that. But absolutely, I mean, you think about Conor, you think about somebody that thrives in pressure situations. You think about. The Madison Square Garden performance against Eddie Alvarez. I mean, my God, that was flawless, in this huge stage. So what will it be like with no crowd? I do have those exact same questions, man. I wonder how it's going to be. I don't think the fight will be the same as it was. I think, both guys, while their base style is about the same, you're right. I think that Dustin Poirier has, first of all, at 155 pounds, I think he's a much healthier human being. But I also think, he's kind of admitted in retrospect, he let that moment kind of get caught up on him, and he wasn't there. I think mentally he's a different guy. And I think, he's not going to want to try to prove a point either. I mean, I think if he's going to be aware that Conor McGregor's, biggest deficiency is in his grappling department. You know what I mean? So to stand there and to trade with him, Dustin's a fantastic boxer, but Conor does have just impeccable timing, man, and impeccable accuracy. And so I don't think that you necessarily just want to get there and strike at range with him. You know what I mean? I think you want to get in the clinch, make it dirty, take him down if you can. And I don't think Dustin Poirier feel the need of like, I have to prove a point and battle him on the feet, and see who can knock each other out. So I think it's a different fight. I'm intrigued by it. I really am. And you just got the point of, Dustin being the more active guy and what does that mean in terms of timing, in terms of comfort and all those things. And, he has, fought in different environments than Conor has. So I'm intrigued by it. I really am intrigued by it to see it. I think it's a great fight. I'm glad it looks like it's coming together because I think it's a good matchup.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual, like, what's at stake now. So, like, we just talked, Conor's a moments guy. He fought Floyd, the biggest fight in combat history. He comes back, he fights Khabib, arguably the biggest, like, anticipated fight in UFC history. Jose Aldo was the biggest fight in UFC history. The Nate Diaz was the highest viewed. That's just what he does. So I feel like normal fights for him don't get him up. And Donald Cerrone did because he's the start of his season. He's a new person, and he changed you saw it obviously firsthand, the way he addressed press conferences and questions. It was just a new look, new him. Does it make sense for an interim title now? So Justin Gaethje just lost that to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib just retired. So now there's really no champion. Does that make sense? Obviously, from a promotional standpoint, now you get the winner of that is now the champion. They have the belt. And now Conor with the belt around his waist just looks like it's meant to happen. Obviously, he has to beat Dustin Poirier, which is a very hard task. Do you think they should make that an interim title?
easiest solution, right? I mean, I think a lot of that boils down to what Khabib ultimately does. You know, Dana White said this past weekend that they're not in a rush to go crown somebody else. You know, that as of right now, they're still recognizing Khabib as the champion, and they're having some conversations that maybe Khabib will come back and fight one more time and go for that 30-0. And I think that's smart. That's prudent. I mean, if there's ever a guy that might stick to his guns on a retirement, it's Khabib Nurmagomedov. I mean, he is a man of principle. He is a man of morals. But he also has plenty of money in the bank, too. He's made a lot of money in his last couple of fights, so he doesn't really need to fight. Although that 30-0 record would be pretty damn cool to try to shoot for that. So I think, honestly, between now and January 23rd, when we think that fight between Conor and Dustin is going to happen, that's a lot of time to change, man. So it could be for an interim title. It could be for the actual undisputed title. I mean, if Khabib really does stick to his guns and says, I'm out, I don't see why you wouldn't just have that one be for the title. I mean, it's there's a lot of talented guys in that lightweight division. There's a lot of people that deserve to be in it. You hear people saying, "Oh man, how cool would a tournament be?" And it would be cool, but it's not going to happen. So it's like it's not even worth talking about. The UFC and Dana in particular don't really like tournaments. So yeah, I think by the time January 23rd rolls around, would not be shocked to see that be for an interim title at worst, or maybe even the undisputed title, depending on what happens with Khabib over the next couple of weeks.
And I just have to, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. Could you imagine, like I said, Dustin Poirier could very easily win, and this may be his belt, and he has a rematch with Khabib. Or I'm just, for a promotional standpoint, and obviously the people that aren't even MMA fans are tuned in, could you imagine Conor gets his belt back, and you get Khabib going for a 30-0 and the rematch? And that would be the biggest fight in UFC history. Now, stylistically, it may go the same way, but either way, to have Conor have that belt back, and it's a rematch, and he's going for 30-0, that's just like, it's like from a movie.
It would be massive. It's interesting because I don't think Khabib wants that nonsense. I don't think he wants to deal with all those headaches again. So I think getting him to do it would be very, very difficult. And as you said, there's a lot of steps that have to happen between then and now for that to even come together.
Course.
But you're right. There's a reason that Dana always talks about it. Those two guys are global superstars, man. They're known all over the planet. I don't even think people maybe understand how big of a star Khabib is. Because in the United States, I mean, yeah, he's well known, but he's not a superstar. But man, you go to the Middle East and the Muslim world, and man, obviously Russia, off the charts huge. So yeah. That fight would be nuts. I don't know that it'll happen, so don't get your hopes too high up. But if it does, it'll be a big money maker, that's for sure.
Now, Khabib did dominate him, so I'm not going to get it twisted. He dominated him, did exactly what he said he was going to do, and he's the most dominant UFC champion I think we've ever seen. Now, people can get into the GOAT discussion. That's one thing I never really get into too much. It's just because I feel like a lot of it's preference, a lot of it's opinion. You can't really go wrong when they're that great.
Right.
But I think it did show certain signs of Conor's game. The fact that he was able to at least win a round, like that's how dominant Khabib is. Like, hey, Conor won a round. So I think that's what makes it interesting. But let's talk about I feel like the UFC, I feel, is a star-driven sport, but a lot of people feel like if a star leaves that they just all of a sudden just sink, and that's not true. You always get new stars emerging. And Israel Adesanya is one of the brightest, youngest stars in the game. He just had that it factor. Even when he wasn't a champion, you're like, okay, he's just gone above and beyond. And now it's like he's taking that next step. He's going for the light heavyweight championship. Again, you don't want to look past the champion. You don't want to look past certain events because more than anybody, anything can happen in the fight game. This isn't a 7-game series. Anyone can get clipped. You could win 4 rounds. You get clipped in the 5th round. But let's just say hypothetical, in a hypothetical world, because that's what we're doing, wins. I know Jon Jones is going for the heavyweight belt, and that's not guaranteed with Stipe, the greatest UFC champion of all time. But it just seems like they're bound to cross paths, whether or not it's for the title, whether or not it's whatever the case may be. Do you think eventually we see them cross paths? Because obviously they don't like each other, and now is testing the light heavyweight weight class. Do you see them crossing paths sometime?
I do. Yeah, absolutely do, man. I think they've been talking way too much trash to each other to not have it happen, man. And it hasn't even been like, joking trash. I mean, it's like straight up disrespect, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think their paths will cross. And I think honestly, if Adesanya is successful in taking the light heavyweight title from Jan Blachowicz, which again is not a given. I mean, Jan is a big, powerful man. If he's able to land, it's going to be problems for Adesanya. But that's the problem, is you got to land, and that guy is so slick and elusive. But if he wins, I can see Jon putting that heavyweight dream on hold and saying, nah. I'm going to get this, because I think honestly, I just think Jones and Adesanya for the light heavyweight title is bigger than Jones, Stipe,
Yes.
I think it's bigger than Jones Ngannou, even, to be honest with you, because then you could do Jones Ngannou after that. If Jones were to beat Adesanya, then Jones Ngannou would be massive. You know what I mean? So yeah, dude. I mean, Jones Adesanya. If Adesanya beats Blachowicz, I think that's a given. And I think, depending on where we're at with the vaccine and the virus and all that, I mean, that could easily be a stadium show, man. That would be
he wants, yeah.
Yeah, he said he wants Allegiant Stadium right here in Las Vegas, man. What an amazing way that would be to kind of christen that in terms of combat sports. And the UFC would love to do it. So man, let's get the scientists to get their job done, and then we'll let the fights figure out how the rest of it gets done.
John, I appreciate your time. I only have a couple more things for you. I know you're a busy man. I feel like Jon Jones is a very interesting point in his career, because I felt like he's so dominant. He's never really lost. And it's like, okay, it's like he was almost going through the motions, but now it seems like he has more fuel than ever. He has this heavyweight task. Ngannou, a lot of people think Ngannou could clip him, like you just talked about. Stipe, and now it's like he actually has a reason to get up and feel motivated. He has actually something to prove. I think, I'm not going to get into who you think would win that fight, but stylistically, obviously it's intriguing. But is it realistic? Because Israel Adesanya, some people think he's a small middleweight. You look at him against Romero and Costa, even though they're ginormous middleweights, he was smaller. You go up to light heavyweight, I can imagine he's probably going to be a smaller light heavyweight. And Jon Jones is talking about moving up to heavyweight. So do you think you would see a distinct size advantage going Bones' way?
I think you would. I mean, I think there'd definitely be a weight discrepancy between the two of them. I mean, as you said, Adesanya doesn't cut a lot of weight at middleweight, and he's basically said, look, I'm not going to pack a bunch of weight on just because I'm going up a division. I just won't have to cut anything. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him well under that 205-pound limit. But we'll see. But that's the thing about it is, the way he moves is so much different. So, I mean, I think there would definitely be a size discrepancy for sure. But man, the speed and the creativity and all those things that Adesanya brings to the table, I think it really would be an interesting clash. And I mean, when you think about Jon Jones too, it's not like you don't think of Jon Jones as like this, one hitter quitter type power where he's going to knock your lights out with one shot. It's more about, overwhelming you and battering you in the clinch and taking you down and those sort of things. So, I mean, if anything, I mean, obviously Jan Blachowicz is the one that's going to be a little bit scary, I think. I mean, Jan, when you think of Jan, you think about somebody that doesn't have near the speed that Adesanya does. So he'll be the much quicker man. But the legendary Polish power that he likes to talk about, I mean, it is there. I mean, he can put your lights out with one shot. So that'll be intriguing as well, just to see if he can stay away from those big shots.
John, I am so intrigued by you and what you've done at MMA Junkie. I will continue to watch and support you. My last question for you is, so we talked about in the beginning of the show, being a fan, obviously being professional, what you do, but at the end of the day, we love what we're talking about, what you're writing about. What has been your favorite moment? You've covered so many events. You've interviewed so many people. What was your favorite press conference or a favorite interview? Is there one that stands out to you? Like, wow, like that was it for me.
Man, it's crazy, right? Because I've been fortunate to be at so many big moments. I think about like the way the stadium went silent when Holly Holm knocked out Ronda Rousey. I mean, it was just that was insane. I think about man, Conor McGregor's first headlining, when he was headlining in Dublin, in that insane fight night crowd. And, it's just, Brock Lesnar, all his fights were just these next level epic type things. You know what I mean? So, man, it's so hard to pin it down to one. I remember, it's kind of a different one that won't be on most people's radars, but I remember when Nogueira knocked out Schaub in Brazil, and to explain how revered Nogueira is, I started looking around in the crowd, and there were people crying, like literally crying, because Nogueira had just won, and here's this kind of, he could barely like take his pants off at the weigh-ins, you know what I mean? Because he was so like beat up and hurt, he had to like lean over, and he got this win, and man, they just loved him so much, So, man, Anderson, like some of Anderson's great moments, man, the Anderson Chael comeback, man, that was unbelievable, man. So, the Anderson front kick to the face with Vitor was unbelievable as well. I was just talking about this the other day. Their face off was unbelievable. They had during the build up to the fight between Vitor and Anderson, Vitor had said that Anderson is fake. Basically, he acts one way in front of the audience and another way behind the scenes. And he said the term that he used was that he wears a mask. And I'll never forget because Anderson showed up on stage, and as they went to face off, like he put like a Jabberwocky's mask on, and then it got in his face. I was just like, oh, wow, it's on another level like that. I was like shaking after the face off. I was like, no, he didn't, So, yeah, man, those are just some of the ones that come to mind off the top of my head.
That is so cool. John Morgan, you are always welcome anytime on this show. It was an absolute honor, an absolute pleasure. On the Road Podcast, MMAJunkie.com. Is there anywhere they can find you? Is there contact you? Because I know a lot of people are going to want to kind of reach out to you or get to know you a little bit more. Is there social media or anything, just website?
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. I try to do my best at social media at MMA Junkie John on Twitter and I'm on Instagram as well. We also, like I said, the MMA Road Show, and we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/the MMA Road Show. We're just kind of getting that started, but that's kind of a fun little place where we have a little community where everybody's kind of chatting and that sort of. All those places, go check it out. Just reach out. I'll do my best to be around when I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I truly appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me, brother.